internet friends, and welcome back to Tama Bites, a segment where instead of talking about a game or a broader aspect of the franchise, we zoom way in on one element of game design and how it helps build the RPG adventure aspect of Pokemon games. Today we're taking a bite out of the Stadium series games and how they're designed to build challenge. Recently, Pokémon Stadium 1 and 2 were announced for Nintendo Switch Online, and the fandom let out a collective groan as the words "Pokemon cannot be transferred to these versions" appeared at the bottom of the screen in the announcement trailer. You see, the Stadium games were originally designed as post-game content for the Game Boy Pokemon games, so a good 90% of the content in them is completely inaccessible without being able to transfer Pokemon in from your save files. They included quality of life features like Professor Oak's lab, a place to manage Pokemon boxes, store additional Pokemon and items, trade Pokemon easily between games, and do things like name your PC boxes. They included exclusive rewards you can only use in the main series games, like mystery gifts, prize Pokemon, mover learners, and so on. And most importantly, the main bulk of the content in the game is designed as tough challenges for you to take on with your in-game Pokemon teams. There are rental Pokemon provided if you don't have access to your own to use, but these rentals are balanced so that you basically can't beat the game with them without significant luck, at least not round 2. Psybeam on Alakazam, Mudslap on Tyranitar, you're boned if you're stuck with these guys. Especially in Stadium 1, where Prime Cup Master Ball Round 2 is possibly one of the hardest challenges in any Pokemon game ever made. You can try to struggle through with rentals, but to me the fun of the Stadium games is getting to continue the story of my trainer with my team that I built in the main games. And it's just not as satisfying to take on these challenges with Pokemon that aren't mine. It's incredibly tough to beat even with Pokemon that you raised specifically for the challenge, let alone rentals that are crappy on purpose. And the real kicker is that they just re-released the games that you would have needed to transfer Pokemon in from a few years ago, but for the Virtual Console on the 3DS instead. So both games are now stuck basically incomplete because they waited too long. I think this is mostly a bummer because the Stadium series games offer a type of challenge that you can't find anywhere else in the franchise. For most Pokemon games, the only post-game content is some equivalent to the Battle Tower, which is essentially a marathon battling mode where you need to get high win streaks in order to win rewards like battle points and in some games other prizes. The tower equivalents, and we'll just talk about singles mode here to keep it simple, have a pool of hundreds of Pokemon that the various AI trainers can use, and you will randomly encounter 3 of those Pokemon at a time. As the win streak goes on, the IVs of the opposing Pokemon increase so that you're fighting stronger and stronger Pokemon. You also bring in 3 Pokemon that you presumably raised to take on the hundreds of possible different species and movesets you can come up against. And the winning strategy most of the time is to minimize any kind of risk in how you play. You bring in a hard-hitting, fast special attacker with coverage for as many types as possible, and maybe a boosting move to set up if you feel like it. Similarly, you bring in a hard-hitting, fast or bulky physical attacker with Aerial Ace in its moveset. And lastly, you bring in some kind of bulky Pokemon with recovery and leftovers to bring in if things get too dicey. You want to have a good mix of genders or even non-gendered Pokemon to account for things like Attract, and you'll want to use held items like the Lumberry to help ward off status. Abilities like Levitate are also good to think about for extra immunity. For the most part, if you've accounted for enough of the possible threats, and have a basic knowledge of most of the Pokemon you'll come up against, you can keep winning, and eventually hit a plateau in difficulty as the enemy IVs cap out. This isn't a boring mode or anything. The fact that you have to win sometimes up to 100 battles in a row brings its own kind of tension, because a single slip-up can set you back days worth of progress. So the stakes get very high, and you have to make your choices very carefully. A loss in the frontier modes with high streaks is more soul-crushing than anything else in the series. However, the fact that you're using more or less the same 3 Pokemon the entire time against a randomized pool of Pokemon means that out of these 100 battles, you won't run into any AI trainers that are actually using strategies that involve any kind of team synergy, unless you get really lucky and it happens by chance. And you'll be taking care of basically the same kind of threats the same way the entire time. Because it's really hard to implement actually difficult AI trainers using random Pokemon, instead these trainers lean really heavily on status, confusion, double team, and other gimmicks that present obstacles that might rely a lot on coin flips. So your best bet is to bring in Pokemon that can deal with these disruptions the best. Out of your 3 Pokemon, you will have an answer for a Pokemon with Double Team, you'll have an answer for a Pokemon with Reversal, you'll have an answer for a Pokemon with Mirror Coat, and so on and so forth. You can even end up running into the exact same Pokemon multiple times if you stay in the same tier of trainers for a while. If you don't happen to have an answer for something, it's back to the drawing board to adjust your team of 3 and then start again from the bottom, if you can recover from the massive hit to your motivation that comes from losing after Battle 50. But Stadium is a different kind of beast altogether. Instead of randomly selected threats out of a pool of possibilities, each battle is designed to play into a specific type of team synergy, which creates a uniquely planned and balanced sort of difficulty the tower modes don't offer. You also bring in a team of 6, and you and the opponent each choose 3 out of your team to battle with each time, meaning you'll be using a slightly wider variety of strategies to survive the specific type of threat you're coming up against. There's a team preview so you can see the species on each team before each fight, and try to pick your best 3 for what you can try to predict the opponent will bring in out of their team based on what you think they see in your team. Both the tower and the stadium modes require skill, but Stadium feels like a test of how well you know and understand the game mechanics and have mastered them to the point that you can outplay a bunch of really difficult stacked decks, rather than how well you've accounted for every possible threat in the game across 3 Pokemon. Let's look at what's in Prime Cup Round 2. There are 8 fights, and both you and your opponent will be bringing in Pokemon at level 100. This mode doesn't auto-level your Pokemon, so you will actually have to have raised 6 Pokemon to level 100 to stand a chance. Otherwise, you'll be bringing them in at whatever levels they actually are, because levels 1 to 100 are allowed here. You start with 3 continues, which means if you lose one battle, you have a few chances to try again, without needing to start from the beginning of the 8 battles. But you can accumulate more continues if you somehow get through these fights without any of your Pokemon fainting. Now do keep in mind this is Gen 1, which has a really unique set of mechanical quirks compared to all other Pokemon games. Critical hit chance and one-hit KO success are determined by a Pokemon's speed. There are no held items, and very few ways to recover from status ailments during battle. Aerial Ace does not exist, so the next best thing is Swift, and although some things were improved in the Stadium games over the Game Boy games, for example, Hyper Beam now takes a turn to recharge even if a Pokemon is knocked out by it, but there are still quirks like Leech Seed and Toxic stacking damage. There are very few good Pokemon in Gen 1, so there are some obvious choices about who to put on your team, but Gen 1's mechanics in general rely much more heavily on RNG-based threats because there are so few moves to go around. Even some of the strongest Pokemon in the game can have a tough time here due to how few tools you have to minimize the impact of coin flips. An important distinction to note is that in Gen 1, DVs and stat experience were not necessary to optimize to do well, compared to the IVs and EVs that you would need to optimize to do well in the tower in later gens. So none of the Pokemon in this mode have max stats, and conversely, you don't need to have perfect Pokemon to do well either. Now admittedly, I need to add another disclaimer, you can use Mewtwo in this mode, which does take a lot of the challenge out of it because Mewtwo is just ridiculously stronger than everything else in the game, but I personally really enjoyed taking on these fights without Mewtwo. So I guess this is subjective. If I'm calling it the hardest challenge in any Pokemon game ever, there is a way to cheese it. And you probably won't enjoy Stadium that much or think it's that hard if you do it by setting up Amnesia on Mewtwo, ignore the teams of the opponents, and just tear down everything the same way the whole time through. And if I'm comparing it to the tower does at least ban most legendaries. So in that way, the rule set there is better balanced. But regardless, I think you will find some of the hardest and most well-designed battles in the series in this game, if you go into it willing to actually engage with them. And just use some of the stronger regular Pokemon, and not the actual literal final boss of the game. I tried to use my beloved Mr. Mime here, and unfortunately was just not quite fast enough to keep up. I did use Zapdos and Starmie in these fights as well, and still struggled in some of these fights. Now, if we look at every single fight, we'll be here forever. Instead, I just want to talk you through this one trainer who's a really good example of how all the members of the team work together to build a strategy, the Rocket. First, we have Sandslash and Weezing, 2 Pokemon who have accuracy lowering moves in the form of Sand Attack and Smokescreen. Now do keep in mind, I didn't say that these trainers don't use disruptive strategies like the tower trainers do, just they also use team synergy. Once you're missing and can't reliably kill anything quickly, Vaporeon or Slowbro can come in and take their sweet time boosting up their stats. Vaporeon has Acid Armor, which on a Pokemon with 110 special already and 130 HP is not something that you want to let it spam. And Slowbro has Amnesia, which with 95 HP and 110 defense is a pretty similar story. These two will wall the shit out of you if you let them. And then with their high special stats also have the potential to do a lot of damage, especially with moves like Psychic, Ice Beam, and Hydro Pump. Slowbro also has Thunder Wave, and of course Ice Beam can always also freeze if you manage to avoid losing too much accuracy. And then if that wasn't enough, Golem and Weezing also have Explosion, which in 3v3 could amount to the loss of 1/3 of your team in the blink of an eye. Half of this team is Ground type, which neuters your ability to prepare for Vaporeon and Slowbro with an Electric type, and Vaporeon, Weezing, and Nidoking also have counters to Grass. This is a difficult team to prepare for, and you'll need to rely on some fast, hard-hitting neutral damage or set damage like Seismic Toss to take care of the 2 stat boosters. Just try not to die before you can take them down. Now this is just one fight out of the 8 in this cup, But I thought it was a good example of how all of the Pokemon in this team work together to stack up a pretty mean challenge that you have to think about which of your 6 Pokemon can best unravel. It takes advantage of not just 1 or 2 gimmicks, but it layers strategies in interesting ways that compound on one another. And it's also built with typing in mind, to make it difficult to come up with a combination of Pokemon that will be able to take out the 2 stat-boosting water types quickly. As I've said before, the Gen 1 games are much more reliant on coin flips and bullshit than later games, because of how few recovery options you have, and how already fast Pokemon are beefed up even further with additional crits and bonus one-hit KO moves. But in spite of how frustrating this cup was to beat for me personally, it's probably the most fun I've ever had with any post-game content in a Pokemon game until Gen 5. If you manage to tough it out, it's incredibly satisfying to say, yes, I did it! I beat Prime Cup Round 2. What's nice about the Stadium Cups compared to challenges that you'll find in in-game facilities in the Battle Frontier is that somebody actually put thought into each of these battles and balanced them specifically to be challenging in intentional ways. Seeing all of these Pokemon work together on a team to fuck you over is inspiring, and it can teach you a lot about creative team building in ways the Battle Tower just can't. If you've built your team correctly for the Battle Tower and you don't get seriously unlucky, your 3 Pokemon can pretty much quickly knock out anything in the pool of Pokemon that you come up against, or else quickly disarm it so that you can move on to the next fight out of the dozens that you have to get through. It is efficient battling, but if you can come up with a moveset that works for such a broad array of Pokemon, it kind of sucks the excitement out of each fight and it just becomes busy work. Whether you win or not is pretty much just luck of the draw about what you come up against. And with so many battles in a row, very few of them are actually memorable. It's hard to think of a team in the Stadium games by contrast that I was able to derail that quickly and move on from. As part of the strategy is figuring out which 3 of your 6 to use against potentially whatever 3 out of their 6 they choose. And because the strategies are pre-planned, each fight teaches you something that you can take with you into the next one. They're both good modes, they're just different flavors of challenge. Frontier facilities are more like a procedurally generated roguelike, whereas the Stadium Cups are more like Dark Souls. So I guess it's a shame that we'll never get anything like this ever again, and that the only version of it available now is impossible to engage with in the way that it was intended. Are there any mechanics you want to see unpacked in a future Tama Bites? Let me know, you know how to reach me. Also, the merch store is finally back! A few years ago, Spring delisted my entire merch store without telling me! It's all back in working order and there's a bunch of new items available as well. Like this super cool Content Not Found egg logo bucket hat. Comes in a bunch of different colors. I do not look cute in this. Very cool switch cases. We have a bunch of different styles. They go on like this. They unfortunately do not fit the OLED switches, but if you've got the original model, it's a good protector for your Joy-Cons. You can shop below the video or check out the link to my Spring store in the pinned comment. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more Pokemon videos. See ya!